Jon Faine on 774 ABC Melbourne and on digital.
The last 12 months or so have seen disclosure after disclosure of scandal after scandal affecting lowly paid trolley pushers in supermarkets, shelf stackers, cleaners in shopping centres and the like, and high-rise buildings, 7-Eleven workers being exploited, fruit pickers. At the moment, there are huge problems, in particular in remote Australia. Fruit pickers, typically backpackers, are staying away because of the new backpacker tax. And in fact, in large parts of northern Australia, crops are rotting because no one's there to pick them. Meanwhile, here in Victoria, the Andrews State Labor Government have just held an inquiry into what's called labour hire, an industry on its own that's been set up to find casual workers to do low-paid jobs. The results of their inquiry are somewhat startling. Charles Cameron is from the peak industry body Recruitment and Consulting Services Association. They look after the labour hire industry. Charles, good morning to you.
Morning, John. How are you?
The economy's in transition. A lot of employers don't want permanent full-time staff. Therefore, we have any number of people looking for casual work, and that's what triggers a lot of these rip-offs, is it not?
Look, it's certainly what triggers the demand for flexible work, John. I think, wouldn't we all love to live in a world where permanent employment could be guaranteed and provided? I think from our point of view, we're very keen to work out how we as an industry can really pull what would be otherwise flexible and disparate work opportunities and pull them to become semi-permanent. I don't necessarily think, though, that legislating to require all forms of employment to be permanent is really the answer here. So, yeah, I mean, a lot of businesses, of course, are going through a lot of insecurity, volatility. The horticulture sector, of course, getting smashed by new climate events, if we can call it that. We need a solution. We actually think that our members who do it right and professionally are the right balance between flexibility and responsibility, John.
The inquiry says that what we're doing is starting to create a second-class tier of workers. There are people who enjoy the benefits and protections of being in permanent full-time work, and then there's everybody else.
Yeah, look, it's I think a really important observation, and I think for the first time we've actually seen a report being handed down by somebody as eminent as Professor Forsyth, who removes a lot of the politics and I think ideology away from this and looks at it from a more rational perspective. We are very concerned that there is a rise of what we might call the non-employed, the informal class of workers. We are concerned that there are an increasing number, not just in clearly labour hire, but you mentioned earlier, retail, of course, shopping trolley collectors, in a whole range of industries. There's direct hire engagement issues, there are labour hire issues. But we've got to look at this and think, what's causing this? I don't necessarily think there are businesses out there who go out to look to engage a dodgy labour hire provider. I think they are suffering issues around cost down pressure from, their clients. More and more we're seeing the way in which contracts are awarded and what we call, reverse bidding auctions when it comes to workforce services. All these procurement practices are actually causing a lot of those who provide services to look for ways to skimp. And we're a little bit concerned that if you squeeze what we say is the reputable labour hire firms who actually do it better in most cases than the direct hire employers, you're actually just going to push many of these organisations further into the black market. That's a real worry.
Yeah, the flip side to it also is that any industry that's not regulated at all or not regulated in any meaningful fashion is wide open to exploitation. And that's pretty much what's happened here too, is it not? You've ended up with a free market approach, a deregulatory mania that's left vulnerable people exposed to exploitation.
Yeah, look, it's an interesting question as to whether it's unregulated.
Well, anyone can set up a labour hire firm.
Anyone can set up a labour hire firm. Anyone
can offer whatever terms or conditions they like. And if your marketing is slick, if your advertising is smooth, if you promise the earth and deliver next to nothing, you're not accountable to anybody.
Yes, look, I would agree with you that there are issues around the fact that there's nothing stopping an organisation going out there and engaging workers as so-called independent contractors when they're unskilled and semi-skilled. This isn't limited to labour hire, though. This is occurring, as you mentioned, in shopping trolley collection. It's occurring in retail. We're seeing the rise of the gig economy, John, which, again, I think is missing from this review.
But people can be bankrupt and set themselves up, looking after other people's wages and entitlements and acting as a conduit. You can have a criminal record and yet present yourself as someone who's responsible and ethical, and you're not. There's no checks, there's no balances. It's wide open to exploitation.
Yeah, we are concerned about the lack of barrier to entry, and look, we've been working on this for a number of years to address it, and we have our own code within the RCSA that deals with this. We've also presented a solution and we'll be formally presenting that to Treasury, called the Employment Services Industry Code, which will deal with these issues around fit and proper people. It will deal with a far wider range of things than those even identified or promoted in the proposed licensing scheme, John.
Why are we so slow to learn, I have to ask, Charles Cameron? I mean, we know what we need to do to protect people. We've done it with travel agents, real estate agents, dentists, lawyers, plumbers. Why do we not just do it across the board? Why do these little, these pockets of rogueness they sit there until there's a massive scandal, and then everyone goes tut 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 afterwards? Oh dear, we should have seen that. And yet it's as obvious as all get out that it needs to be dealt with.
Yeah, absolutely. And I raised this many, many years ago. We wrote letters to the ACTU saying that we were concerned about these rogue operators. We wanted to work together with them. We got no response, which is, of course, our concern is it's just become political. We raised this with the Fair Work Ombudsman, the Department of Immigration, many years ago, because labour hire was identified as the preferred employer status for the Pacific seasonal workers scheme. We've raised concern about the fact that these pockets, as you say, of rogue labour hire operators and labour contractors continue to flourish. And I sat in a roundtable with the Department of Employment, instigated by the federal government only earlier this week, and they're looking at multiplying by 10 the penalties that apply to these operators. And indeed,
which is meaningless unless you've got people out there doing checks. We learned with the training rorts how meaningless the supposed penalties are there, because no one was in fact checking to see if these training rorts were taking place. And they obviously were. We were reporting on them. Other media were reporting on them. There was no inspectorate. There was no political will, no effort or commitment made to pick up on the clues that were just plainly there to be seen.
We fundamentally agree with your concern, and we were up in Mildura at one of the hearings into this labour hire inquiry. We saw backpacking operators, hostel operators coming in and saying, oh look, we just work out what the wage rate is by sort of what's in the wind on the day, or what we're hearing on the grapevine, pardon the pun. We're fundamentally concerned that introducing more law, more regulation simply requires more inspectors. And that's not necessarily the solution. We think the solution is actually very much to focus on the buyers of these services. So if the buyers actually do have some responsibility and can indeed be held accountable, they are as dodgy as the dodgy labour hire supplier. If there is no funding of these dodgy providers or rogue operators, then they don't exist. So rather than looking at it from a regulatory point of view, we've got to look at it from the demand side pressure point of view. And that's where we're working with industry and the Australian Chamber of Commerce and Industry and the Australian Industry Group to look at how it is that we have the buyers of these services not fund these operators. And we think that's the sustainable solution, John.
Well, there are class actions galore looming on some of these particular scandals, and that's one way to try and get the message across. Although then the problem becomes one of Phoenix companies, where the people who are being asked to make good, they just fold and start up another business the next day. But that's another story for another day. Charles, I'm indebted to you for your time this morning. It's been fascinating. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for your interest, John.
Charles Cameron, who's CEO of the Recruitment and Consulting Services Association, which is the peak industry body for the recruitment and workforce services industry in Australia.